It's graduation season, and while headlines have been aptly stolen by crowds booing regalia cloud AI shows and good on ya, I'm surprised there haven't been more people talking about another commencement speech. Earlier this month, Erica Kirk accepted 2 honorary degrees on behalf of herself and her late husband. You might have heard of him by this point. This could have been seen as merely the president of Hillsdale College, a one Mr. Larry PR in making good on a promise he'd made last year on stage at Kirk's funeral.
We are going to give Charlie and Erica the greatest respect a college can give, an honorary degree.
And benevolent administrator that he is, he also surprised the student body just before commencement with the exciting news that their class speaker would be none other than superstar widow Erica Kirk. So I would like, if I may, to give you the opportunity to look at this wholesome college graduation tradition between a grieving old man and a bereft mother in a different way. Perhaps unsurprisingly, this video is not about some compelling oration delivered by Erica Kirk on the Hillsdale graduation stage, at least not necessarily. No, this video rather is about why she was speaking there at all, especially considering her late husband was notoriously anti-academia, at least in the traditional sense. So how did Mr. College Scam become Hillsdale's best unofficial student of all time? Which I would be offended by if I were a student, to be clear. The reality is that the relationship between Hillsdale's president, Larry P. ARNN, and Charlie Kirk did not simply flourish in text messages, as they imply, but rather under the auspices of a secretive Christian Nationalist coordinating body, and once you know about them, you'll hear them everywhere they aren't. To put today's topic in meme parlance, Erica's appearance at Hillsdale is just the tip of the proverbial iceberg meme.
Hi, Editor Babs popping in to say that there were some light technical difficulties the first and second time that I recorded a lot of these clips, and I just didn't have time to do all of it again. Hopefully all the information is still as digestible as the better produced parts. Thank you for your patience.
So we'll begin with the reason this video exists at all. If you haven't heard the name the Council for National Policy, that's exactly how they prefer it. In her definitive text on the subject, Shadow Network, Ann Nelson writes that the CNP was founded in 1981 by a small group of arch-conservatives who realized that the tides of history had turned against them. In order to keep their Christian nationalist values a priority in these United States, they would have to organize. So for the last more than 40 years, leaders of well-known groups, names that you know, have coordinated, going on to shape policy quietly, hand in glove. Now, I am going to go into more detail, but I want to say up front that the members of the CNP are far from the only baddies in the room. Not complimentary. The Global Project Against Hate and Extremism does some excellent visual mapping, and in April of 2025, they gave us this one. Of the far-right network as a whole, identifying major organizations and individuals with the most influence, meaning how connected they are to other influential nodes, that is, individuals, in Trump's orbit. And they found that there really is no distinct cluster or center around which these various pro-Trump organizations naturally coalesce. Rather, there is significant intermingling between the senior leadership and the boards of directors of all of these organizations, meaning that the far-right universe, as they put it, is rather incestuous. And on a personal note, I am on record regarding how much I hate Elon Musk for his role in the hydroxychloroquine debacle, and I have doubts he would ever be allowed into the CNP, so I feel confident in saying the following. Their intentionally low profile has allowed the CNP to have flown under the radar the longest, and thus their influence on the present moment is the most underrated. Former Ohio representative and president of the CNP's action arm, Bob McEwen, said that the CNP doesn't do ad campaigns, it doesn't do brochures, it's a meeting of leaders. This is what I mean when I call them a coordinating body, or as they put it in this leaked piece of CNP literature, an educational organization, though technically they're a charity, but it's just a long-time group of colleagues getting together, a little rendezvous. And those meetings and sessions, they're all closed to the public and to the media, and participants are told not to talk to media about the group or its proceedings. Further, the membership directories and identities of CNP members are supposed to be confidential and not disclosed outside of membership. When journalist Robert O'Hara Jr. asked about the CNP's efforts to operate in secret, Bob McEwen rejected the premise of the question, saying it's not a secret, it's just private, and anything we want to elevate is going to be elevated by the members. McEwen said that members have privacy rights and that confidentiality helps create an atmosphere where participants can freely exchange ideas without unwanted judgment. Perhaps obviously, considering the amount of sources I've referenced just thus far and the length of this video, there is enough about them that's been made public that just about anyone with a little moxie can learn quite a bit. All of this is publicly available information. Intrepid journalists like Anne have been able to collect a number of membership listings and other literature that you have and will continue to see me cite. These are just some of the membership listings that have been hacked or leaked. You can go look at them yourself. While I don't believe that we have a list past 2022, this is obviously much more than we would otherwise have without their hard work. Now, all of that said, they are still secretive enough that their name recognition with the general public is comparatively low. Like when I name members and their groups, whether that be the Heritage Foundation, Turning Point, the NRA, those are far more likely to get in, I've heard of that, than the Council for National Policy itself. And wait, if the CNP is so secretive, how do I know about them? Who am I anyway, right? No better time for an intro. Hi, my name is Babs, and the most important thing for you to know about me for the purposes of this video, my very first on YouTube, is that I have lupus. It is, in fact, sometimes lupus. That's kind of the whole thing about that joke. The autoimmune disease can affect any part of your body, and it can look different in lots of different people. The immune system can attack skin, joints, internal organs, and to keep it from doing that, I, like millions of other people, take the medication hydroxychloroquine. You may have heard of it. In March of 2020, I was among at least 825,000 other lupus patients who was unable to refill my essential daily medication when it became a cure-all for the far right. Now, just by chance, I had been traveling before all of this went down, so I had gotten an extra large refill of my pills. Totally lucky timing. So out of work and under stay-at-home orders, instead of making sourdough and watching Tiger King, I took advantage of this body that was still properly medicated and tried to learn about exactly why this was happening to people like me. I do want to be clear that what happened to hydroxychloroquine was incredibly complicated. Anyone who's heard me talk about this over the past 6 years plus can likely attest to my insistence upon this nuance. But a load-bearing part of that complexity, especially as spring turned to summer in 2020, was the Council for National Policy. Amid the chaos that was those first few pandemic months, CNP members started to regroup. They had little patience for the ways Americans' concern for their health was impacting their wallets. So, in true merchants of doubt fashion, they honed in on America's market-tested trust of doctors and got some of their own to sway the public. What better way to get people back to work when there's an extremely contagious, deadly, and disabling virus in the air than when some randos wearing fresh out of the bag white coats try to sell them a miracle pill? I just they couldn't have even steamed the coats, just a little. Anyway. I'm going to go through some names of members that may ring a bell. I'll start with Kevin Roberts, who's recently been getting some attention on TikTok for his PhD in African American history. Guess who else? Current Speaker of the House Mike Johnson, quote, crucial link to the White House Ginny Thomas, wife of Clarence. Fellow CNP member Rachel Bovar describes her as the most powerful and fierce woman in Washington, the tip of the spear in these efforts. And we can't forget her bestie, Leonard Leo of the Federalist Society. They're also key members of the Alliance Defending Freedom, who are behind the rash of anti-trans legislation that's been sweeping the nation. There's been a number of congressional members of the CNP over the years, including Representative Barry Loudermilk, who got caught giving Weird Little Capitol tours on January 5th. And if I remember correctly, he also paid his CNP dues with campaign funds. A mess. James Thompson, Rick Santorum, Kellyanne Conway, Jerome Corsi, Steve Bannon, and Josh Duggar. And there are just so many others whose names you may not know unless you also have a hobby of looking at the boards of think tanks or media conglomerates. They're also key players in the push to restrict women's bodies, to make weapons more accessible, to overturn elections, and, as is relevant to today's topic, to politicize and privatize public schools. So in that vein, let's think of Hillsdale, which, if you'll recall, is where Mrs. Kirk was giving her commencement speech, the reason we are talking here today. Think of Hillsdale as the education arm, or dare I say mountain, of the CNP. But that's for another video. Multiple CNP members are tied to Hillsdale leadership. There's board member Christopher F. Backhelder, I think I'm saying that correctly. He's the former vice president of advancement for the Mackinac Center of Public Policy, which, if you can believe it, is another free market think tank. And they were part of the Project 2025 coalition. They had employees contribute to the manifesto, but were asked to be disqualified in July 2024. Then there's Mr. Douglas A. Jeffrey, Hillsdale's VP for External Affairs. He also counts himself among CNP leadership, but the strongest connection by far is none other than the school's president, Dr. Larry P. Arnn, who calls Hillsdale, quote, a last redoubt of the classical liberal arts. Founded by the notoriously abolitionist Free Will Baptists, Hillsdale's 1,600 students call about 400 acres adorned with larger-than-life statues of Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher in southern Michigan home. Somewhat ironically, despite being founded on traditional Christian values, women were admitted to Hillsdale from its inception, making it the second oldest co-ed institution in the U.S. behind only Oberlin. Every undergraduate student at Hillsdale studies the same core curriculum, emphasizing the, quote, spiritual and intellectual inheritance of the Western tradition. There are 2 years of required courses in rhetoric, biology, and philosophy, which culminate in a class on the U.S. Constitution and another in Western heritage. President Arnn has said much of what is taught at Hillsdale was written before there was a United States of America, much less a modern conservative movement. Though it's been around since 1944, Hillsdale really started to garner attention in the 60s. It's when they attempted to bypass a federal civil rights law requiring the reporting of statistics on the racial makeup of the student body. This is a pattern they'd continue when they later refused federal funding to avoid disclosing the student demographics and adhering to Title IX requirements on cases of sexual discrimination. In 1971, the president preceding ARNN, libertarian and early CNP member George Roche, he would form a quasi-alumni journal called Imprimis, offering it free to Hillsdale graduates. But then, over the next 40 years, Imprimis, like so many catalogs, would end up in millions of mailboxes, often free of charge and unrequested, becoming the most, quote, influential conservative publication you've never heard of, claiming to be read by as many people as the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal. But even after all that work, come 1999, George Roche III would resign in scandal. And it really is scandalous. So the editor of the publication Imprimis that we just talked about was actually his daughter-in-law and rumored lover of nearly 2 decades. She would take a handgun from his cabinet and take her own life on campus. And this was only after George had divorced his wife of 44 years while she was undergoing cancer treatment. As you might imagine, this was not great for Hillsdale's already pretty mid reputation. So this is where ARNN steps in. Born in Pocahontas, Arkansas, the son of a Phillips Petroleum employee, ARNN often describes the personally transformative effects of studying philosophy, which took hold in a political theory course his senior year at Arkansas State. A self-described Cybertruck driver, ARNN is one of the original founders of the Claremont Institute, serving as its president from 1985 until he took the Hillsdale position in 2000, when he became their 12th president, a position he still holds today. While at Claremont, he was the founding chairman of the California Civil Rights Initiative, or Prop 209, which was passed by California voters in 1996. This prohibited racial preferences in state hiring and admissions, which you may know by a more familiar name, affirmative action. Indeed, that 1996 proposition was a precursor to the 2014 Supreme Court case that you may be more familiar with. That's Schuett, is that how you pronounce it? Schuett and versus Coalition to Defend Affirmative Action. It was a 6-2 ruling declared in... Oh, sorry, there's a hummingbird outside my window. How delightful. Okay. This 6-2 ruling declared the initiative constitutional, meaning that states had the right to ban the practice of racial and gender preferences, so-called affirmative action, if they so choose to do so through the electoral process. One of the most bananas things I read about ARNN in the process of making this video was from a colleague at Claremont who once said, "Larry ARNN has the heart of a liberal. He keeps it in a glass bottle on his desk." ARNN remains Claremont's vice chairman, or at least he was in 2024, and he also sits on the boards of both Hillsdale and the Heritage Foundation, where, in 2012, he turned down the opportunity to be their president, choosing instead to remain at Hillsdale. And that presidency would actually go instead to CNP member Jim DeMint. ARNN saw his commitment to Hillsdale as being, quote, presented a chance to spread the gospel on a broader canvas, closer to the political ground. Now, 2012-2013, this is right around the time that Larry ARNN likely met a young Charlie Kirk. At 19, in Jackson Hole, Wyoming.
I have one short story to tell you about Charlie Kirk, my friend. He became a friend of mine because I interrogated him one time. 19-year-olds are my specialty.
Phrasing?
Are we still doing phrasing? I'm not sure what Wyoming event this was, but if Charlie was 19, this easily could have been within the year of him starting Turning Point USA in 2012. So although we don't know what the precise event was, I don't think it's out of the question to speculate that it may have something to do with Wyomingite and CNP member Foster Friess, whom an 18-year-old Charlie met in a stairwell at the Republican National Convention, and the rest was history. No, but actually, weeks later, he'd get his first 10K from Friess, who joined the Turning Point Advisory Council along with CNP member Ginny Thomas. I know I keep repeating CNP member, but it can be tough to keep track, again, because, you know, not everybody is a CNP member, but many are. But back to that night in Wyoming. Author Quinn Delamater writes for Hillsdale about their meeting. ARNN recalled being so engrossed in conversation with Charlie that he didn't speak to anyone else at the event. Afterward, he thought he'd never hear from Kirk again, until a month later, he got a text from an unknown number showing a picture of a Hillsdale online course certification of completion. The text, surprise, was from Charlie Kirk, who'd apparently tracked down ARNN's number himself. Now, although 2019's ill-fated Fall Kirk Center, based out of Liberty University and unceremoniously shut down in 2021, directly preceding his 2022 college scam, that may have been Charlie's highest profile, less than traditional foray into higher education, but I believe Hillsdale was still his first, and what with the Falwell scandal and the counting or not counting gang violence of it all, I'd wager it was probably likely also his best. For over a decade, the two remained friends, and Charlie went on to complete 30 Hillsdale online courses. According to ARNN, Kirk was the best unofficial Hillsdale student of all time. Clocking in at a cool 73 years old, ARNN says of Kirk, "I fell in love with that boy. He was my friend." In February 2025, Charlie described Hillsdale as the only exception to the whole college scam thing. "There is no place like Hillsdale College. The students are different, they're focused on the right things. Since Hillsdale's focused on the right things and all, viewers like you can take all the courses that Charlie took at home on their website. In just about any other context, I think I would actually be touched by what appears to be a lovely intergenerational friendship held together by the thrilling act of learning, but the context, everything about it just kind of bums me out. Now, viewers at home, you may have heard of ARNN from the headlines he's made over the years. In 2013, he referred to students of color as the dark ones.
ARNN, who sparked controversy nearly a decade ago before the Michigan legislature when he addressed his own school's diversity efforts.
We violated the standards for diversity because we didn't have enough dark ones, I guess is what they meant.
Then in 2022,
as the Hillsdale president mocked teachers who have education degrees.
If you work in a college, you'll know this, unless you work in the ed department. Ours is different, but they're the dumbest part of every college.
For the record, I love you public school teachers, K through 12, all public. ARNN later tried to explain in a Tennessean column that by dumb, he didn't mean unintelligent, but rather ill-conceived or misdirected. I'm sure. But honestly, I wouldn't blame you if you missed those, especially if you have little personal connection to all of this world. I don't and miss them myself. But it is a big club, though. In Politico, Alice Lloyd says that ARNN is considered a unifying figure in conservative circles. Curious! Couldn't have anything to do with him being, like, a documented member of the Council for National Policy since, like, 1996, right? Total coincidence. In 2016, ARNN claims his evangelism for Hillsdale had him in the running to be education secretary, and although he wouldn't go on to hold the position, he's been able to have plenty of influence at home from Michigan. And then he can keep up his time-honored routine of stopping by the cafeteria to ask students about the nature of the good, the true, and the beautiful. Please leave your thoughts about the nature of the good, the true, and the beautiful in the comments. Thank you. While Hillsdale had already turned rightward under Roche, I still don't know. While Hillsdale had already turned rightward under Roche, ARNN pivoted from his predecessor's previously popular libertarianism toward a, quote, more overtly religious and ideological path. While the college's mission statement once invoked the dog-whistly Judeo-Christian faith, under ARNN they ditched that Judeo to a more explicitly singularly Christian. And Nelson writes in Shadow Network that, notably non-denominational, Hillsdale still stood apart from the rest of the fundamentalist colleges associated with the CNP, which maintained affiliations with specific religious leaders or denominations. The CNP designated Hillsdale to serve as its constitutionalist bulwark and groomed it to feed the coalition's operations on Capitol Hill and in partner media. To underscore its more explicitly Christian direction, in 2019, the school opened a $28.5 million, 27,000 square foot chapel with a dedication that featured an address from Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas, someone who calls ARNN a dear friend. And again, Thomas's wife is a prominent CNP member who has also previously served on Hillsdale's board. Oh my god. Thomas actually has previously spoken at the CNP too. I have had this picture saved on my phone since 2022 and I cannot remember where it's from. If anybody watching knows, please let me know. Thank you. The addition of this giant chapel expanded the Christian offerings in its free online course catalog. I don't understand how that works. It's online. You don't need the big chapel for it, whatever. They expanded their offerings online, and in 2021, its chaplain, a minister ordained in the Anglican Church in North America and hired in 2016, went from part-time to full-time. While the school still has no faith or chapel requirement for its students, it has gained the reputation of hosting a devout, majority Christian student body. So much so that the school has attracted a church plant from Christ Church, the Moscow, Idaho-based church of stridently conservative pastor Doug Wilson. Now all of this renovation, the bringing on the chaplain, full-time, and ARNN's over $1 million compensation package, rare for college Hillsdale's size, this all costs a pretty penny. And if y'all recall, Hillsdale famously does not take any federal funds because it considers Title IX, quote, a serious assault on the school's freedom. So it may come as no surprise that ARNN is also a hell of a fundraiser, but it doesn't take a lot of savvy when you've already got the CNP, led by the DeVos family, as your donor network. By 2017, Ann Nelson writes that their endowment had reached $547 million, much of it courtesy of CNP members and their donor networks. On a per capita basis, this amounts to over $380,000 per student, outstripping many colleges including Columbia, Brown, Vanderbilt, and it's just like unheard of for a school of its size. More than half of its revenue comes from private grants, gifts, contracts, compared with 7% for a typical liberal arts college, according to the Institute of Education Sciences. Their fundraising strategy, predicated on stoking outrage. They send these warnings of Marxist-inspired critical race theory and an emerging corporate socialist totalitarianism. I can't say it with a straight face. And you know what is so funny though? As I was doing this research, I realized that I actually get these fundraising texts on my work phone. I
work a full-time job, I have a work phone, and I get these texts on it. They think my name is Kenneth, even though nobody named Kenneth has ever owned this phone, at least at this job. They don't know where I live, which is great. I get texts from all over the USA, and some of them are even a little flirty. I'm like low-key a little glad that it's me with this work phone and not anybody else, because at least like I know what I'm looking at when I get these text messages, even though sometimes I wish I didn't. Jumping back to 2017, despite saying of Trump that, quote, there's obviously a lot of things that are really great about the guy, but we don't teach our students at Hillsdale College to act the way he does on all occasions, Larry ARNN was still tapped to serve as chair of the short-lived 1776 Commission, which was convened in December 2020. This was an advisory board Trump put together with the intention of combating critical race theory and restoring the core principles of America or something, but for all their florid blessings of liberty language, it was a pretty straightforward response to the 1619 Project and the movement for Black Lives, which they hated.
The philosophic understanding at the heart of modern education is enslaving. And we have to break out of that.
As our investigation previously revealed, Hillsdale's 1776 curriculum teaches kids that conservative ideas are what the nation's founders intended, that democratic or progressive ideas are not.
Progress that is definitely being made.
On the Black struggle for equality, Hillsdale teaches the civil rights movement was almost immediately turned into programs that ran counter to the lofty ideals of the founders. On federal laws opening up lunch counters and outlawing discrimination in restaurants, hotels, and theaters, Hillsdale says this was where the line between private conscience and government coercion began to blur.
The commission was to prepare a report, which was ultimately released only 2 days before Trump left office and was widely derided by historians as politicized and a soft-focused version of American history. It took particular aim at progressivism, which it lumped in with slavery, fascism, communism, racism, and identity politics as one of, quote, the challenges to American principles. I don't know, maybe Mike Pence, who's now a CNP member himself, put in a good word for Larry ARNN, who he has called one of his rare mentors. I know I might feel like I'm jumping around a lot, and for that I'm sorry. Hopefully breaking this up into chapters will be a little helpful, but I think it may be clear by now that this is such a tangled spider web that it's difficult, if not impossible, to talk about one thing without talking about another. To talk about the college, which one alum referred to as Arn Arbor on Facebook, without talking about the CNP, or this singular elderly man. In an online talk that Hillsdale posted in 2020, ARNN said, "We are in the world conquest business, and we just have one weapon: teaching." Writing for the New York Times Magazine, Danny Hakim says that over 2 decades, ARNN has fashioned the college as an avatar of resistance to progressivism, and the supplier of philosophical gravitas for the new right. Under ARNN's stewardship, Hillsdale has become as much a political and ideological campaign as it is a pedagogical home for its students. The Global Project Against Hate and Extremism would call this, quote, becoming a major player in the transnational far right, by which they mean part of a whole ecosystem of institutions, media, think tanks, publishing firms, lobbying groups, all that have arisen to support the agenda. Kinda sounds like the stuff that CNP members run. Indeed, the GPAHE would describe schools like Hillsdale as entrenched within broader far-right networks, oriented more towards political indoctrination and providing support for the broader far-right rather than traditional curricula. Like, yes, they train students, but they also host far-right intellectuals and put on large conferences, provide funding for events, etc. For students on campus, the teaching staff like the leadership based on the available information and, at times, surprisingly low-resolution images provided on their website. They all have something pale in common. Also, side note, the board is chaired by Pat Sajak. Yes, that Pat Sajak, who, as far as I know, has not come up in the CNP before.
But all those kids on campus, they at least get some interesting speakers out of all of this, right? Libs of TikTok's Higher Right Chick, Newt Gingrich, Christopher Rufo, Christy Noem, Dinesh D'Souza, Ron DeSantis, Your Dream, Blunt Rotation 2, right? Now, the GPAHE goes on to say that in liberal democracies like Hungary, which, congratulations, this was written prior to you guys winning your election, in liberal democracies like Hungary was at the time, they are also used to produce propaganda for the regime and to train bureaucrats and teachers who, by government policy, are directed to those institutions. And wouldn't you know it, earlier in this year of our Lord 2026, Hillsdale was named as one of 2 Michigan institutions where the Department of Defense is now considering sending service members. In a post on X, the Everything app, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth said that the days of institutions subjecting warriors to woke indoctrination are over. We demand that senior service colleges work to sharpen our war fighters on genuine national security issues, not just social justice activism, Hegseth said. If senior officers want serious education in the principles they swear to defend, Hillsdale is exactly where they should be, a spokesperson for the college sent in an emailed statement. Interesting. But this is far from the only venture that Hillsdale is engaging in to bring more widespread attention to the small campus. In 2011, Hillsdale started offering free online, not-for-credit college-level courses that were famously advertised on the Rush Limbaugh show. Those were the courses that Charlie took. In 2015, they announced that their enrollment for online courses had surpassed 1 million, and that 800,000 people had already taken their Constitution 101 course to help America begin to turn around and restore lost liberty. But they'd soon expand to a younger audience. Come 2021, Hillsdale publicized its own free classical K-12 1776 curriculum, which promised an unbiased treatment of American history. Spoiler.
It wasn't.
It wasn't. But providing curriculum alone wouldn't prove to be enough. Hillsdale now also operates a network of private charter schools across the country. As of 2022, the network consists of 24 schools in 13 states. Governor Bill Lee of Tennessee actually invited the college to start over 50 schools in the state using state funds. Since then, several locations have been approved. However, after those dumbest parts of the dumbest colleges comments, there has been more local resistance to those charters, and congrats to them. Offering religious curricula, charter schools, as well as school vouchers, these are time-honored CNP-favored methods of destroying public education. I feel like these terms are probably most well associated nationally with the former Secretary of Education under Trump 1, Betsy DeVos. But of course, she was at this far before her stint in federal government in her home state, which she shares with Hillsdale, Michigan. Though Betsy herself is not a member, Ann Nelson describes the DeVos Prince family as CNP royalty. Founding member Richard DeVos Sr. served twice as president, first from 1986 to 87, and then again from 1990 to 93. His son Dick was also a member. Betsy DeVos's father, Edgar Prince, was an early member, and then her mother, Elsa, joined the board of governors after Edgar's death. And her brother Eric is a Hillsdale alum. Nelson goes on to say in Shadow Network, Dick and Betsy DeVos often work together as a team. With her husband, father, mother, and brother as leading members of the CNP, Betsy could scarcely escape its influence. Now, of course, unfortunately, these people have more money than God, and they allocated each member of the family with a portfolio with which to influence different issues. Under Betsy's purview, education. The first modern school vouchers, which in theory are government-funded certificates that allow parents to take the money intended for their child's public education and pay for private school tuition or other educational expenses like with, say, homeschooling. The first official program for these vouchers happened in Milwaukee in 1990 during the Honorable Rich DeVos's second term as CNP president. We have so much to talk about, so I won't go too far off on school vouchers, but if you want to read more about them, I recommend the work of Josh Cowan, especially his book, The Privateers, which does not shy away from the CNP's role in this policy. Something I did get a kick out of, though, I don't actually own Cowan's book. I borrowed it from my library when I read it, so when I was looking around for some of his information online so I could properly relay it in this video, I did come across this review in Education Next from a Heritage Foundation guy, and I gotta read what he says. He says, I have to confess, I have never heard of the Council for National Policy before. You'd think I would know the name of an organization writing me those fat checks and delivering marching orders to my inbox daily, but it must be so secretive that it's still even secretive to me. Like, they don't do that. They don't write checks. If you're not invited to the conference, there's probably a reason, Jay. Like, it's still a club, and I have spoken to people who have tried to get into these meetings who were not explicitly invited, and the security is tight. But briefly, Cowan shows that vouchers highlight the ways that vast wealth, virulent ideology, usually Christian nationalist in nature, but also a powerful strand of economic libertarianism and insular networks of intellectuals, lawyers, and lobbyists have, as in so many other parts of our lives, advanced an agenda from the rightward fringes of policy and into the political median. Just scooching that Overton window right on over. When it comes to higher education outside of the Michigan campus, we have to travel south. First, and most darkly amusing to me personally, they have a satellite campus on the border of Connecticut and Massachusetts that is a replica of Thomas Jefferson's Monticello, boasting 7 buildings, 8 ponds, and miles of scenic wooded trails. I am disappointed to report that this was donated by one of the founders of Friendly's Restaurants, so finish up your last Monster Mash, kids, because they are using this place to host seminars, lectures, and training sessions for K-12 teachers. Further south still, in Florida, DeSantis' administration tapped Hillsdale to help overhaul their civic standards. They used Hillsdale staff and undergraduates as consultants to review math textbooks for perceived whiffs of leftist ideology. DeSantis, who ARNN has called one of the most important people living, it was kind of like in reference to him as a candidate, but like one of the most important people living, Ron DeSantis. Anyway, he said that he prefers hiring Hillsdale alumni rather than those from his own alma mater, Yale. Indeed, in 2023, when DeSantis famously took over the liberal New College of Florida, a small liberal arts college in Sarasota, he appointed a Hillsdale and Claremont official, Matthew Spalding, to its board. The new college, the governor said, would be a public Sunshine State Hillsdale. That fall, shortly after the takeover, nearly 40% of faculty members resigned. To anyone watching who loved the New College of Florida, I am so sorry. It must be devastating to watch this place that you loved turned into Larry Yarn and Matthew Spalding's image. Now, Spalding has had a couple busy years. Prior to his stint at New College, he oversaw Hillsdale's programming at their satellite campus in Washington, D.C., the Alan P. Kirby Jr. Center for Constitutional Studies and Citizenship, conveniently located right across the street from the Heritage Foundation. What more do you need? Spalding, who's called gender studies ideologically driven and teneditious, talk about a $10 word, I did pronounce that a couple times. If you haven't learned one new word this video, I will eat my hat. Spalding says that the DC campus is where the college radiates its mission, hosting lectures and seminars, like they do everywhere, on the importance of constitutional governance. Politico describes the Kirby Center as in 3 conjoined townhouses, caucusing regular retreats and dinners with members of Congress and staff to discuss the finer points of constitutional governance. It's also home to several schlocky paintings of Churchill and the Founding Fathers, a glass-encased first edition of the Federalist Papers donated by conservative radio host Mark Levin, and 24 or so interns each semester, most but not all of whom work on Capitol Hill or in conservative media. Because, as we've sort of mentioned, there is a lot of conservative media presence in the CNP. On the Kirby campus, there is the Boyle Radio Studio on the top floor, which enjoys a close relationship with CNP-owned Salem Media. Launched in 2015 at the same time as the Michigan campus's WRFH Radio Free Hillsdale, the studio is part of a new and unique Hillsdale program to train students in broadcast journalism. It's home to weekly and daily broadcasts from folks like the Federalist founders Ben Domenech, I think I'm saying that correctly, and Hugh Hewitt, who called the place Hillsdale's, quote, lantern of reason, the lighthouse of sweet argument and persuasion in the shadow of the Capitol. It's poetic. The reciprocal presence that is Hillsdale's DC campus has meant that, as Catherine Post writes, Hillsdale has been repeatedly enlisted by the Trump White House to shape narratives about American history and civic engagement, including as part of the semi-quincentennial, nailed that on the first one, commemoration. I literally wrote in my notes, I think I said that right, so that I would have a minute to sound out semi-quincentennial, but I friggin' nailed that on the first one. It's America's 250th birthday. I've seen this initiative under a few names, America 250, Freedom 250, and I gotta be real, I am not sure what the distinction is, and I cannot bring myself to do enough research to understand, so just know there's a lot of birthday shit afoot. Indeed, Hillsdale has had a hand in some of this birthday shit. The school has worked with the Trump administration to produce The Story of America. You're gonna get an educational video series and curated content to fill a fleet of mobile historical exhibits they are calling Freedom Trucks. Now, if I may be purely speculative for a second, I'd wager that the name Freedom Trucks is actually to refresh the SEO around that phrase that became associated with the Canadian trucker convoy in early 2022. Long live the Ram Ranch Resistance. Anyway, their video project, these trucks, are efforts to frame the president as part of a lineage of American leaders who made the nation the greatest republic to ever exist. I feel like I'm making that face a lot in this series. Anyway, in general, the Hillsdale approach to U.S. history favors triumphalist narratives that celebrate American exceptionalism and depict shameful episodes in American history as the exception, not the rule.
That too turned out to be a lie.
That said, Hillsdale is actually not the only CNP-affiliated group on the Birthday Planning Committee. In September 2025, the Department of Education and 41 groups launched a coalition for civics education in conjunction with the America 250 campaign. 20 of those 41 groups are affiliated with the CNP, and one is the CNP itself. This is just another instance of the quiet part being said out loud more frequently these days, but we'll get to that later. The goal, and I'm so sorry when I read that, my brain goes, that's the goal now. The goal is to craft civics education programming that will, quote, reignite the fires of patriotism. Rich, coming from Linda McMahon et al., standing in the ashes of the Department of Education, which now, during Trump's second term, has been a major target. DOGE, I will not be pronouncing it as word, aimed to shrink it by about half, and on March 20th, 2025, Trump signed an executive order aimed at closing the department to the maximum extent of the law. But all of this is still not enough for CNP members and their allies. Though they are truly seeing the fruits of decades of their labor, traceable as far back as Brown v. Board, to destroy public education coming to fruition, there's still always more to be done, especially when, states are pushing back to the best of their abilities, and they're using us, our neighbors, to do it. The phenomenon I'm going to try to get at in this part has been explained different ways by different people, but it's all kind of trying to get at the same thing, that the systemic dismantling of public offerings that Hillsdale and the CNP as a whole engage in hollows out our society, even when things appear to be humming along. There are still regular elections, kind of. There are still laws, kind of. There's still a federal Department of Education, kind of. But there's also this just like pervasive sense of dread, and people don't really participate in civic life the way that they used to. This insidious reshaping leaves a kind of void, kind of like when there aren't any more adults on the playground, which makes the statement from New York Magazine that to some, the college is an emergent bully very apt. John D. Michaels and David L. Knoll, authors of Vigilante Nation, which I recommend, they call this a vigilante democracy. You have a system that preserves the formal trappings of democracy, but people are afraid to participate in it in the real ways that democracy requires. The authors often make the comparison to the Jim Crow South. If you simply looked at the laws on the books without understanding how they operated in practice, you would think maybe things weren't so bad. But we know that the reality was different because there was systemic denial of Black Americans' ability to exercise their rights. Maybe you have the right to vote on paper, but the board that counts the votes, they know that if they get the wrong result, vigilantes are going to be parked outside your house. And indeed, it appears Hillsdale has a penchant for imbuing its ideologically aligned students with that same kind of culture warrior style politicking we've watched unfold through our phone screens. You know, it's yelling at city council meetings, it's PTA moms to abortion snitches to heavily armed white nationalist militiamen to CNP members who, with the advent of the internet, are taking what used to be confined to the local and making them into national flashpoints. A prime example of this kind of thing, what Michaels and Knoll call discrete spasms of Christian nationalist rage, is actually captured in a new documentary called Mom's Club. This follows a group of moms close by me here in Southern California as they come to understand and push back on the ways that the Council for National Policy is looking to influence and harm queer kids in their local schools. You may have heard about some of this, especially if you're in the Southland like I am. It's happened at Glendale, at Cheeto Hills, still kind of happening, and like CNP members literally showed up to their meetings. It's so bananas. When I watched Mom's Club, it was almost like looking in a mirror in terms of like the way that their experiences kind of unfolded and like the way that they came to understand like who was who. I resonated so heavily with the way that, you know, things unfolded in my own life around hydroxychloroquine. And I'm not a part of this documentary team by any means, but I did get to know some of the folks that worked on it because they're locals. And I just can't recommend enough getting the chance to see this film, and they are trying to finish it and they're trying to get it into wider distribution. So at least recently they've been hosting some online viewings, and all you have to do is donate like $25 to their GoFundMe so that they can like put the finishing touches on their film, and then you also get to be one of the first people to see it. Last thing about Mom's Club, I actually went to a showing at the LA Press Club. I'm not a member of the press. I just like saw that they were having a showing and I was like, wait a minute, that's Ann Nelson on the poster. And if I see Ann Nelson on a poster, I feel like it's going to be good. So I scooted my little ass down to the club, and the screening was rowdy. Left Coast Right Watch actually wrote this up. A couple of the folks who were in the film, you know, playing a part in this anti-queer push. One of the film subjects is Jordan Henry, a man who had no children enrolled in the Glendale Unified School District when he moved there in 2021. He still quickly inserted himself into school politics, and, you know, at this screening, he was kind of totally ignoring the point of the film and, like, asking some, like, wild questions that were just like, what's the point of the film, essentially? Like, me and the other queer people in masks who came to the screening, we were just, like, giggling to ourselves. And then the other person who was identified making a stink at this film was none other than congressional candidate for California's 30th District, Scott Myers. Okay, that said, another example can be found closer to Hillsdale's Michigan campus. In 2022, a doctoral candidate in politics who served on the city's public library board pulled from the Vigilante playbook, proposing that, quote, the library's children's section exclude books tending to corrupt the morals of the youth, including those depicting, quote, delinquency, child abuse, underage sexual activity, as well as, quote, graphic violence and profanity. That is, removing books with any reference to political content, including queer people and Black Lives Matter. Quote, library board meetings became more crowded and angry, and the librarian, the children's librarian, and the library board president all departed. Soon, one of Hillsdale's librarians took over as the library board president. Quote, there's always been this rift. The college elites and us townies, says Penny Swan, a Republican who was defeated by one of the Hillsdale PhD students in the 2022 city council election. But it has never been as bad as it's been in the past couple of years, and the college PhD students seem to want to take over the town. This is unfortunately par for the course and exactly how vigilantism works. Vigilantes force their targets to conceal their true identities, censor their words, and refrain from political and civic engagement. Now, I alluded to it a little bit, but there are a couple different kinds of vigilantism, but all of them converge. when it comes to elections. And if I had endless time, this is where we'd go into the ways that Hillsdale College staff were infamously tied up in the big lie, the attempts to overturn the 2020 presidential election in favor of Donald Trump. Let's see if I can give you a little TLDR with reporting from the New York Times. Robert E. Norton II, their general counsel, and Hillsdale-affiliated lawyer Ian Northam were involved in concocting the plan to deploy fake Trump electors in Michigan, while ARNN counseled Vice President Mike Pence to block the certification of the vote in the House. Oh, and then the dean of the DC Center was involved too, same with John Eastman. It's just too much. All of that and all the other CNP connections to election interference, see Cleta Mitchell, would be a whole fucking video in and of itself, and I just have to draw the line somewhere. This whole process already took me multiple days, longer than I was hoping it would, and though I'm at least glad to have altered my expectations early on in this process, I'm doing my best, people. I got a full-time job. The last thing I want to say about the CNP specifically for now is that their current president, hydroxychloroquine superfan Tom Fitton, has started posting on Maine lately, about the CNP. He is a little bit more of a beefcake kind of guy. I get the impression he's just a little less buttoned up than some of the other past presidents of the Council for National Policy, but I don't think that's the only thing that's changed. In fact, I've mentioned throughout this video a few times that there have been instances where the CNP has been listed by name, where I feel like I've been trained not to expect them by now. What with the secrecy and all? They're scarce on Hillsdale's own website, save for a little mention in Foster Freese's bio of an award, not membership, in Imprimis in 2004. And then Ann Nelson notes in Shadow Network, can you see there's actually there's a little picture of it. I'll put it on the screen. I just like that she printed a tweet in color. This Pence tweet from May 19th, 2017 reads, "Join the Council for National Policy leaders in the conservative movement who, at POTUS, are renewing the conservative vision in our time." And it's accompanied by a photo of Pence at the CNP podium, flanked by a vision statement. A united conservative movement to assure by 2020 policy leadership and governance that restores religious and economic freedom, strong national defense, and Judeo-Christian values under the Constitution. Obviously, it doesn't say anything about his membership, because as far as I know, he wasn't a member until after he left office. I guess, seeing mortality with a bunch of people trying to get you in your office might make you want to hang out with some friends. I don't know. As far as we know, he didn't join until 2022. And then in my Googling, there's this one alum, Randy Keefe, who, like myself, was undergrad, class of 2016. And like all people who graduated in or around 2016, Randy was an intern, special assistant to the executive director at the CNP, who you might remember from the beginning, Bob McEwen. And like everyone who was probably sent somewhere on a scholarship, he will not shut up about it, whether or not he wants to. It's hard to tell. He's all over the place talking about this internship, including in this Hillsdale in DC brochure available online. And not only is this PDF low quality, but it also appears that they left some comments on the publicly available file too. Awesome job. But hey, if you got to spend your fall break at a conference where not one, but two presidential candidates offer you a job and probably only one actually means it, you'd probably drive that story straight into the ground too. Anyway, according to his high school, old Randy went to work as the managing director of CNP Action. That's the arm they do stuff with since they're technically a charity. And via Hillsdale in DC, he's been at that position since he graduated in 2016. But ZoomInfo.com says that from 2015 to 2019, decidedly after his graduation, Randy worked as the social media coordinator for Hillsdale. Curious. What's the truth, Randy? Okay, anyway, I don't know entirely what all this public shit is about, but I gotta say I'm not thrilled with it. If you didn't mean to make all this public, now you guys know. Go take it down, Randy. I've got it saved. Don't worry about it. Oh my god, hi. As I was editing this, I realized that I forgot to add something about, like, the CNP talking on Maine, and this was, like, what made me want to talk about this in this at all. Okay, so when they announced that they were going to give these honorary degrees to Charlie and Erica, they put out a press release. If you're not familiar with what a press release is, it is like the top portion tells the story, and then the bottom portion, there are usually bios for the people who the press release is about. So they have like a blurb about Charlie Kirk and a blurb about Larry P. Arnn. And in the blurb about Larry P. Arnn that is hosted on the Hillsdale College in Washington, D.C. campus, press release for the Charlie and Erica degrees. And of course, they confer the degrees in Michigan, not on the DC campus. So just noting that this is like the DC campus talking about this. In that bio, it says that he is a member of the Council for National Policy. But I went back and I looked at his like regular bio on the Hillsdale College site proper, and it's not there. So I don't know when he updated this bio, but he definitely did, and the one in DC specifically mentions the CNP.
curious. And the other thing that I noticed was missing that real CNP heads might notice is that I just didn't talk about the Leadership Institute at all. Morton C. Blackwell's Leadership Institute that uses the DC campus for some operations and it's trained a ton of people. I just didn't have time to get into it, and I feel like the Leadership Institute could be its own video, and then you get your ties back to Hillsdale then. Remember, it's a very tangled little web. Okay, cool. Thank you. Editor Bab out.
So to bring us back around again, as we've seen in delightful form from booing anti-AI crowds, commencement speeches are actually for the students, not the speaker. But we've spent this whole time talking about the speakers. I've been referencing this 2024 New York Times Mag piece a ton throughout this video, and when word got around that the author, Danny Hakim, was working on this piece about Hillsdale, nearly 24 people got in touch. Quote, many felt revulsion at the public coziness between the college and Trump. Anna Meckel was the 2018 valedictorian, set to give her speech at graduation, the same commencement where VP Mike Pence delivered the same address that Eric Kirk would go on to as well, almost a decade later, declaring that the Trump administration was, quote, advancing the very principles that you learned here in the halls at Hillsdale. I was sitting in the audience in tears, in embarrassment and frustration, Meckel told Hakim. This is supposed to be the culmination of the education that I received, and instead the school is making a mockery of itself. She added, I was literally crying. I'm going to sound like a snowflake, I guess, but whatever. It was a travesty. Another student heard me crying and reached out to me afterward and said, this isn't the send-off we deserved. Meckel sent me, Hakim, a link to a fundraising pitch that cited one of the college's free online courses on Dante. It warned that the Biden administration is trying to force critical race theory into K-12 curricula and offered the poet as an antidote to the left's assault on American education. It's not about Dante or the Iliad or the Odyssey, she said. It's about getting clicks and views from people who want to own the libs and be enraged by the Biden administration or by cancel culture. And that's nothing like what I was taught in the classroom when we went through the great books. My professors didn't say anything about reading Dante to own the libs. Another alum, Will Smiley, class of 2005, said the undergraduate college has been used as a base for the intervention into American politics. ARNN, he added, was lending the institutional credibility of Hillsdale to Donald Trump. Coincidentally, or not, perhaps, in much the same way that the CNP lent their credibility to Trump when he was a candidate, leading the way for the modern right to fall in lockstep behind him and them. If it's not clear what I meant by that, and Nelson depicts the entire shift to get the right to fall in line behind Trump as a candidate in Shadow Network. I have a TikTok about this and a lot of other TikToks about the CNP. There's a whole playlist if you're into that kind of app, but I totally understand if you aren't, and if that's, too short for you, that's why I'm here. So anyway, ARN is quick to frame Hillsdale as the heroic opposition. Most liberal colleges and universities today deny that such a thing as truth exists, and instead encourage young people to find what is true for themselves, carrying their politically correct safe spaces wherever they go. Though I don't think this is quite what ARN meant, quote, almost all of the students and alumni that got in touch with Hakim, quote, expressed gratitude for their liberal arts education and said that Hillsdale had nurtured the critical thinking skills that led them to reject Trumpism. As a recipient of an education from a small liberal arts college myself, I like to think that I would have rejected Trumpism without it, but I can certainly say that with it, I share their sentiments.
Oh my god, Dad, this is wild. What do we do about it?
Dare I quote the commencement speech that brought us all here today? For the graduates, or viewers, it means that responsibility has now settled upon you. That's very important, not as a burden meant to overwhelm you, but as a calling meant to ground you. You are now in a position where truth must be pursued and defended, because to the world, they believe that the truth is something to be reshaped, but to all of us in this room or watching this video, it's something to be honored. So I don't know. I don't have all the answers, but I did this footwork. This is 6,000 plus words that I have written and read and edited out here for you. I've also given you a bunch of recommendations to read and watch. I think, if I may, that I have honored the truth by making clear that Kirk's presence at Hillsdale had far more to it than meets the eye. I've given you a look into a world that's almost certainly impacted you in some way. How? It may take you some research, but maybe you've already found a connection just based on the information I've already provided. I hope you'll share with me in the comments how you figure out the way or ways that the CNP has touched your life. And if all of this has you mulling over ways that you might be able to do something about all of it, consider the following. In his November 2020 CNP speech, Larry P. Arnn said this: "There's a war on. You've been fighting it for a long time, and one of the things I want to say to you today is that we're not winning it." I know that I, now 6 years later, can say that I am still doing whatever I can to make him feel like they're still losing. How about you? Oh my god, okay, cool. That's it. That's the video. Let me know if you have any questions. Seriously. YouTube is a new medium for me, and it is one that I've resisted for a while. So your input will really help me envision what the future direction of these videos could be. Hashtag like and subscribe.